And welcome back to What America's Thinking. According to new polling by OH Predictive Insights, Arizona Congressman Ruben Gallego is the most popular candidate in the upcoming 2024 Senate race. Take a look at these potential matchups. In a race excluding Senator Kyrsten Sinema, Gallego beats every potential Republican challenger, including Doug Ducey, Blake Masters, Kari Lake, and Karen Taylor Robson.
But in a three-way challenge with Kyrsten Sinema and the same Republican challengers, the sitting congressman still comes out ahead. He fails to receive a majority of vote in any matchup. So here's what he told us last month when we asked him about that potential three-way race in 2024.
We understand polling, and more importantly, we understand Arizonans. She is very unpopular with Democrats and independents. Her running is more likely to pull from the Republicans because she, basically has abandoned a lot of the values that people care about in Arizona. So we know that if we run a strong race, that's the best chance for us to actually hold this seat, because Senator Sinema is never going to be senator again. She's going to end up in third place, and it's going to be a very low third place in the teens to even lower than that. And the only way for Democrats to hold this is we run a strong Democrat that really aligns with Arizona values, that has trust with the voters. And it's not Sinema that has that. It's someone like me, and it's something I'm going to earn over the next 2 years.
So, I mean, this poll is good news for him, definitely. There were a lot of questions about whether in a split with an independent Sinema, a Republican candidate, any Republican candidate, and Gallego as a Democrat, whether he would come out in first or second place. Does this, this is a very long race ahead of him. Does this put him in a really good position, or is it just slightly good news?
I think it's slightly good news because we're so far out ahead. A lot could change from now depending on what Sinema does and such. But look, he's going to want to obviously build his name ID. He's not a statewide elected official in Arizona. He only represents 8 districts. So I think he's going to be focusing on that. And he seems to really be trying to build his profile, coming on programs like with us, but also, just campaigning all around the state. So, I think it depends a lot on who the Republican who gets in is and how they position themselves. Remember, Arizona is a state that's not known for electing ultra progressives or ultra conservatives. I mean, Doug Ducey, the governor, is obviously, or the former governor, I should say, is obviously a conservative, but I wouldn't obviously put him in that pro-MAGA crowd with Donald Trump. Arizona is home to people like the late Senator John McCain, very much a maverick, maybe conservative in a way, but not ultra conservative. So, and the same thing with progressives. The current governor of Arizona, Katie Hobbs, she is not an ultra progressive either. So I think he has to be careful, and I'm going to be curious to see how he runs in a general election as opposed to a primary, because there are going to be potentially more moderate Arizona independent voters who might not be happy with the Republican candidate, but may not be willing to get on board with an ultra progressive. So
there's a lot that I'm looking at in this race. There's obviously, will Sinema announce, because she still hasn't announced.
Yeah.
That's a calculation that she has to make. This poll shouldn't be very encouraging for her specifically. And then when you're talking about these primaries, it doesn't seem like Gallego's going to have a realistic primary challenger, because he's getting in so much ahead of time.
Right.
It's going to be really, really hard to debunk him as a Democratic nominee. So barring a surprise on that front, it's the Republican primary. We're thinking of a spectrum that goes from Doug Ducey to Kari Lake. And I assume Gallego is rooting for somebody like Kari Lake to win that primary, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Ruben Gallego would love nothing more than going up against someone who's, may in a very small segment of the Republican Party, very conservative segment, may be popular, but across the board, I think she lost a lot of credibility, obviously, in the election. So he would love nothing more than that. And also looking back to 2022, candidates like Kari Lake did not do well in general elections. So I think that's something that Gallego would be very interested in. That being said, though, I think there's going to be Republican forces in Arizona that might want to push back on that after seeing what happened last year.
So are Republicans going to pump in a lot of money into Arizona because they have a lot of potential pickups, and these these races are really expensive. I assume it'll be much cheaper for them to try to compete in West Virginia, where they could be really competitive, or maybe Montana, where doesn't have the population of Arizona. Do they risk spending too much money in Arizona and threatening other potential pickups?
I think it's very possible, and I think they're going to be watching, obviously, we keep saying what happens with Sinema. They'll want to play that out, but we talk about Montana and West Virginia, but also Pennsylvania. That's a very expensive state. Ohio, maybe not as expensive as Pennsylvania, but still home to a very formidable Democratic incumbent who's is going to be pumping a ton of money, Sherrod Brown, into that race. Nevada, another major state, Senator Jackie Rosen is relatively vulnerable, so that's could be potentially expensive as well. So I think it's a strategy that we'll be watching for on the Republican side, but I think they're going to be watching for really how this plays out, what Sinema does. But I think it's a very good question about money, because Arizona is an expensive state. It
is an expensive state. One thing that I see in Gallego, Democratic leadership hasn't really backed him. Nobody's really endorsed him at this point from the big names in leadership. But I think they're going to grow to love him because he has been such a good fundraiser. Remember, he ran the Hispanic Caucus campaign arm. He's quitting that at the end of this quarter to focus on his Senate race. But he's going to get money from streams that aren't necessarily the same streams that'll take away from the Senate defending those other seats that we're talking about. Yeah, that's such a good point. And, not to sound like a broken record, but once again, I think the Democrats are also waiting to see what happens, because even though Sinema is not officially with them anymore, she still caucuses with them, and she's still an ally to Chuck Schumer. So it creates a bit of an awkward dynamic, but that fundraising factor is huge, especially in Arizona. So a few weeks ago, we asked the congressman if he thought there was a lane for a progressive in Arizona. Here's his answer.
Look, I think these DC labels don't matter to voters in Arizona. They really just care about someone that understands them. And I believe at the end of the day, when they learn about my history and the fact that I had to work hard for everything I've ever earned in this life, the fact that I didn't have a bed till I went to college, the fact that, I had to work, your line jobs, your carpenter jobs, your meatpacking factories, the type of things that a lot of people do, but a lot of senators forget when they go to D.C. and they want someone to fight for them. And at the end of the day, that's what matters. And look, we've litigated this already. This is the same thing they were saying about Fetterman. They're the same thing they're saying about Warnock. I have the same voting record as Mark Kelly. And by the way, in Arizona, no matter who you are, no matter how left or right or center you are as a Democrat, you're always going to be too liberal when the Republicans attack you. So it's about connecting with the voters and really talking about their issues and listening to them. That's what really matters in the end.
So when it comes to favorability, Congressman Gallego is the only candidate to receive a net positive rating. So according to Predictive Insights, Gallego, unlike many of his potential challengers, is the most popular among voters 55 and up, college grads, and parents. He also has a net favorability with independents that's higher than any other tested candidate, and really shines among Hispanics and Latinos with a net favorability of 18. Yeah, so that's interesting. I mean, Gallego could be good for young voters. It seems like that's huge. And obviously Hispanics, two very important voting blocks in Arizona. The surprising one is the 55 plus, because yes, with Latinos in Arizona, I mean, there is a hunger among many, especially Democratic Latinos, who are the majority, who really want to see a statewide Latino representing them. They want to. They know it hasn't really happened. It hadn't really happened in California until Senator Alex Padilla got appointed and then elected by his own right. But they kind of want to beat. They want to beat California. There is a little bit of competition of like, we turned this state blue by being active in politics. But what do you think of that 55 plus number? I think it's huge because you hear Arizona, obviously compared to Florida, because you have a lot of people from maybe northern parts of the country out east who are moving there. So he's going to obviously want to work to, get that contingent, for him. And I think that's going to be a difficult voting block for him, as it is, I think, maybe
maybe for Democrats in general, because we know that older voters tend to vote, more conservatively sometimes. But one question I have for you is, how does Gallego approach the situation at the southern border? That seems to be something that's been huge for Republicans, big messaging. They're continuing to message on it. So, and I would imagine in a state like Arizona, it's going to be big.
It is big, and it is different than it is in Texas, and it is different than it is in California, more similar to New Mexico. Why there's fewer border crossings, there's a lot more desert, there's a lot more proportionately more criminality associated to the border. They also have issues with Indian nations, in specifically the Tohono O'odham Nation that actually crosses the border.
Right.
And one of his first campaign events was at the nation. So he is focusing on the way Democrats at the border are trying to spin this is we're focusing on border lives, on how people live at the border, on the commerce, on the cultural exchanges, and they're trying to sort of have it both ways, talking about like we also need to do something about the criminality that does happen between drug smuggling north, gun smuggling south. The movement of money is a big problem. But also, I mean, all these border communities only exist because they're on the border. Like otherwise, they just wouldn't be there.
Right. Right.
So it is something they can spin. But I mean, I don't think that Republicans are going to let go of this issue in the next 2 years at all. Yeah.
Well, and that does it for us this week. We'll see you next time on What America's Thinking.